Please.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna start sharing my screen.
Yep.
And presenting. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm talking to you from Cambridge. I am from Peru, but now I work at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. And this is a center that is dedicated to the study and mitigation of risks that could lead to human extinction or civilization collapse. So these type of events are the ones known as global catastrophic risk or existential risks. And I leave you there the link for visiting our website and maybe signing to the newsletter so you can get information from updates about what we're doing and different things that we are working on at the moment. The different type of risks that we study come from natural disasters, but also human-made. And in this slide, I just want to bring up some of them. So for you, maybe this helps you because it's related to something that you do at your work, and maybe this could be the first step to have a collaboration, communication between both sides. So for example, nuclear war is one of the events that are on our side, the misuse of artificial intelligence, climate change and ecological collapse. And also one of the drivers that, of course, we have identified and is a global risk is global injustice. And this could be inequality, corruption, or structural discrimination. We also have human engineered pandemics. Well, in this case, COVID-19 was not one of those, but let's say that a very fatal virus can be created in a laboratory, because now we have all the technology that has make everything more easy in terms of genetic engineering, for example. And that's also one of the other topics that are raised here, because human manipulation of the genomes of plants, animals, and even humans is something that is in our concern, because maybe can be translating into a bioweapon or maybe not. And the picture that I have here, it's to represent the do-it-yourself community that you may have heard. There is a group of people that is interested to do biological experiments, which is great. There are many good things coming out of it. Democratization of science, for example, is one of the things that they say. But I will be a bit concerned about the genetic engineering happening in the garages or at home, when, as some of you know, as scientists, we have to follow many ethical courses. And every time that we do a new research, the ethical committee of a university has to approve this, the amount of animals, why are we using these animals for these experiments, and then also making secure that the biosecurity and biosafety is up to date. And these kind of things are not possible if we don't have control or monitor of what they are doing in their own houses. So that's also one of the topics that we talk about and discuss. And when we talk about natural risk, of course, we have in our minds asteroid collapse, an asteroid coming to Earth, or a super volcanic eruption that can block many things in a global level. And in our center, we have a very interdisciplinary approach, which means that, for example, I'm a molecular biologist, but my colleagues are philosophers, economists, lawyers, people working on machine learning, artificial intelligence, sociology. And that's the way how we want to approach this type of events and study them, because it has to be a holistic approach to get holistic solutions. And that brings me to my project, or the project that I'm involved in, which is a science of global risk. And it's a project that started this year, and it's gonna last for, we have a grant for 3 years, and we have 3 postdocs working on it. And what we want to do is to really think about how can we develop a science for global risk. And we have 3 pillars for this project. The first one is about which methods do we need to develop in order to think about these future events. And for that, we have my colleague Luke Kemp working on forecasting and modeling of global risk. And he does it by focusing on foresight methods. You may have heard about horizon scanning or fault trees, and there are many different variety of methods that are being used for thinking about these future events. And this is something that I feel that the scientific community is not very well they don't know much about it. And I think that's one of the things that we should promote in order to teach this type of methods for different type of disciplines. And the different countries are also adopting these foresight methods. For example, the UK has the Science and Technology Office has a group that is working on horizon scanning, and they did with us, with academics in the UK, a big study about what are the 10 topics that the UK government should be more transparent about during the COVID-19, for example. And some weeks ago, thanks to the Global General Academy, I also received training from the Canadian government when they told us which type of methods they use for different type of events. And just some days ago, I was with the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Switzerland, also creating a community of people working on these methods. So I think it's good that we enhance how important are these type of methods, because we need more investigation, of course, about this method, but also how to apply it. And the second pillar is the designing of practical solutions for the management of global risk. And this is the part that I lead. And how we want to do this is by the co-creation of policy recommendations. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that on my next slides. And the third pillar is led by my colleague, Lara Mani, and she is in charge of growing the user community for the science of global risk, that more people knows about what we're doing. And I know that there are different efforts around the world, so we just want to map them and then see how we can create these bridges and collaborations. And also something that is very important is, how do we communicate risk? Is risk understood in the same way in Japan as it's in Peru, as it is in Malawi, and how we can find like a common ground in order to move forward. So now in the next slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about this second point, how to the co-creation of policy and how to design practical solutions. So I feel that my job needed to be at two levels. One level at CSER. CSER is the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, and at international level. So what I decided to do at CSER level is to learn what we have done in terms of science and policy so far. So what can we learn from our own staff and from our own policy engagements that can be taught to the rest of our team, and that can make us be more impactful every time that we try to reach society, industry, or the government in terms of policy engagements. So as a first step, what I have started doing some months ago is to create a report on policy engagements, but based on best practices. So I asked them to fill up a survey, and then I had a group of interviews in order to extract what are the best practices in regards to how to start a policy engagement, how to maintain it, what are the skills that we need for this particular area of global catastrophic risk, and what are the rewards that we have, and how can we monitor policy engagement through the time. And there are very fantastic examples that I have learned so far. And for example, CSER has been key to create an all-parliamentarian group for future generations at the parliament in the UK. There are also work on foresight for the WHO, the World Health Organization, and now they have been also invited to the Cabinet Office in order to write to have their advice in order to write a report on security in the UK. And there are many examples like that I'm going to be sharing with you, hopefully within 2 months when we publish all these results. And then all this information is also helpful because we want to develop like a scorecard, something that can help researchers at CSER and also anyone that wants to use them about how to think what are the steps that can help you to have a more impactful policy engagement since the beginning, before you start your research, during and after. And we already have started doing that because that can help us to maybe measure how our policy impact can be monitored. And one of the things that I have also realized within these interviews is that within our own staff, and I think also worldwide, there is a misconception about what is policy impact. And for example, some academics think that policy impact is just with policymakers, and they forget that civil society or industry is also part of these stakeholders that we can engage with. For example, some of the CSER academics have been supporting about the ethics report or the ethics basis for a new tech company to be validated in artificial intelligence. That's, for example, one of the good things that we can learn from it. And so this scoring system, I hope, help us to define what is policy impact for our institution and globally, to help us monitor, to help us create maybe a database. And the last phase is what is going to be at the end of the report, when it's about policy recommendations for our own institution. For example, do we need more training? Do we need to create a policy board in the same way as we have an academic board that give us strategic advices about how to start a new research? We can have maybe a policy board that also, since the very beginning of the co-design of our research, we can think about how we can make our policy impact more sustainable. Shall we invite different policymakers? Shall we invite the representatives from the industry to come to our workshops or to our expert elicitations that we do sometimes, and we work on different papers and scientific articles? So some of those are the things that we are thinking about. And of course, for sure, develop a strategic plan for the next year and the next year, in order to think about what are the pieces that we need to do in order to be more impactful in policy. For example, now I can see that in our center, we have a lot of engagements at the government in UK, but just a few in the governments around the world. So is our strategy for next year to increase the number of our advisors around the world? Maybe not. So this type of reports help us to have continuity. And at the international level, my work is focused on thinking why these type of events are not taken seriously by policymakers, by governments around the world, and what can we learn from efforts that have already been happening in different countries, trying to make these type of events more to be observed by by policymakers, and to reach the high level table. So for that, I'm planning to do with a series of stakeholders that will be our partners. And our partners will be from academia, industry, governments, and civil society, to develop these practical solutions with concrete proposals and recommendations that can be implemented by policymakers. But how do we do that? So I'm planning to do 2 big workshops during these 3 years, 2 years and a half now. The first workshop will be to talk with key partners, probably science advisors around the world, or ex-policymakers that have tried to bring, for example, the misuse of AI to their governments and to take action about it, citizens, journalists, the industry, to think about how we can create a framework for a science of global risk. What do we need to do? Do we need to, for example, the Sender framework is a framework about global risk. In the same way as climate change has the Paris Agreement, the Sender framework is something for all countries that have signed, and it's about how they manage global risk. And they are monitored every year, but they don't talk much about this type of events. I mean, of course, they have like emerging technologies risk, but shall we be more in depth? Shall we be more in detail in this framework? If that is our aim, let's say that during the first workshop, that's what we decided to do, then we will go through there, because that's the best framework for pushing for a science of global risk plan. But maybe that's not the plan. Maybe the best strategic thing is to think about, I don't know, reform the United Nations, or create a holistic approach where we start changing the secondary curricula, the university curricula, and start inserting this type of global catastrophic risk studies, or we create a PhD program about this. So my plan is that during this first workshop, we will find out what's the best strategy to create this framework. And during the second workshop will be about how do we make that these recommendations will be deployed and adopted. Because we can create the most beautiful policy recommendations, but if they are never tested, we will never really know if they work or not. So with this workshop, we plan to invite key policymakers, civil servants, and institutions that can help us test these policy recommendations, and maybe can adapt in their own countries some recommendations that we write. So far, we have started to do some collaborations with some partners, and I just want to mention briefly some of them: the International Network for Government Science Advice, and the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research in the Americas, all the continent, They are supporting us on the design and the development and the writing of the results of this workshop. And of course, the IAI will give us a space to present our policy recommendations during the conference of parties of all the countries on the Americas, which will be very, very great to bring our voice and our results to this high-level table. With the biological weapon conventions, we also have an agreement that we are gonna be bringing some workshops for co-creation of policy with its member states during the regional capacity building workshops that they will have next year in preparation for the 5 years review of the convention. And with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, that office is the one in charge of the Sendai framework, of course. I'm part of the expert review group for the development of a new global disaster risk reduction agenda towards it's a way to update the Sendai framework for the next years. So that's also one of our paths that we can follow in order to learn more about global risk and how to think about creating a framework of a science of global risk. And recently, we were supporting the Science 20 group, which is part of the G20 summit, in order to, well, we gave them policy recommendations about foresight, which was the method that I mentioned before about thinking about the future. And we also wrote an essay about policy recommendations about foresight and global catastrophic risk that you probably will find it on the G20 book. And with the World Economic Forum, I'm now part of the Global Future Council on Frontier Risks. So we are also thinking about what are the next risks that are coming in 5, 10, 15 years, and what are our policy recommendations in order to be ready and manage them better, from preventing to mitigating. And that will be my last slide. And I just want to finish by saying that this comic that you see here is actually a comic of 3 pages that we produced with my colleague Luke Kemp in order to approach science to society and to policymakers, because this comic is based on scientific article that we published about bioengineering issues that are going to be relevant from 5 to 15 years. And we thought that we should try something new. We should innovate and see how we can bring all this academic world into the ground, and that can be useful for society to make these type of topics be part of the dinners, with your families, and also make policymakers interested in our job and approach us when they need to know a little bit more about this type of topics. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Clarissa, for the general introduction of the activity of the CISA and also